In the corner of a small diner in downtown Manhattan, where the afternoon light filtered through rain-streaked windows, a young woman sat across from a stranger. Her name was Sarah, and in her worn leather purse, folded carefully between old receipts and a cracked phone screen, lay exactly $5. $5 that represented her entire budget for this blind date, Prosen, enough for 1 cup of coffee, and maybe the cheapest pastry on the menu. At 24, Sarah had learned to make difficult calculations. Rent or groceries? Bus fare or lunch? Today, it was dignity or desperation, and she had chosen dignity, even if it came with an empty stomach and a racing heart. Her fingers traced the edge of her purse as she glanced at the man across from her, a guy named Marcus, who had seemed charming enough through text messages, but now looked at her with the casual indifference of someone already planning his exit strategy. 3 tables away, in a corner booth that provided the perfect vantage point for observing the entire restaurant, sat another man entirely. James Wellington was 42 years old, though most people guessed younger due to the careful way he carried himself and the expensive cut of his charcoal suit. The Wall Street Journal lay folded beside his untouched sandwich, and his phone buzzed intermittently with messages from his assistant about board meetings and acquisition deals. But his attention had drifted from quarterly reports to the quiet drama unfolding at the table near the window. James had built his technology consulting firm from nothing, turning a 1-bedroom apartment startup into a company that employed over 300 people. He understood the weight of watching every dollar, the careful choreography of making $5 stretch into something resembling normalcy. What struck him about the young woman was not her obvious financial constraints, but the way she held herself, straight-backed and alert, as if poverty were simply another challenge to navigate rather than a source of shame. Sarah's companion, meanwhile, had already decided this date was a waste of his time. Marcus worked in marketing for a mid-level pharmaceutical company, drove a leased BMW, and had specific expectations about the women he dated. Those expectations did not include someone who ordered black coffee when the menu offered elaborate specialty drinks, or someone whose shoes, while clean and polite, had clearly walked many miles on city pavement. So, Marcus said, "What kind of work do you do again?" Sarah straightened slightly. She had prepared for this question, rehearsed it during the subway ride downtown. "I work several part-time positions. Morning shifts at a bakery, afternoon tutoring for a family in the Upper East Side, and weekend inventory at a bookstore." Marcus nodded with the kind of polite disinterest that suggested he was already mentally composing his exit text. "That must be busy." From his corner booth, James found himself leaning forward slightly, straining to catch fragments of their conversation. Something about Sarah's posture reminded him of his daughter Emma, the way she squared her shoulders when facing something difficult at school. Emma was 7 now, living with him full-time since his divorce 3 years ago, and she had inherited his stubborn refusal to back down from challenges. The divorce had been necessary, but brutal, leaving James with full custody and a profound wariness of dating. His ex-wife had married him for his potential rather than his reality, and when that potential became a demanding career and unexpected single fatherhood, she had simply walked away. Since then, James had built walls around his personal life that rivaled the security systems protecting his company's servers. But watching Sarah navigate her companion's obvious discomfort stirred something protective in James, something that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with recognizing someone who refused to apologize for their circumstances. "The thing is," Marcus was saying, loud enough now that James could hear every word, "I'm looking for someone who's really got their life together, you know? Someone independent." Sarah's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "Independent? I mean, someone with a real career. Stability. I've got my own place, my own car, and I'm looking for someone who brings the same energy to the table." The irony was not lost on James. Here was a man who had probably never worked 3 jobs simultaneously, lecturing someone who clearly understood independence better than he ever would. Sarah's knuckles were white where she gripped her coffee cup, but her voice remained steady. "I understand," she said quietly. "I think independence means different things to different people." Marcus glanced at his phone. "Look, Sarah, you seem nice, but I don't think we're really compatible. I've got to head out, early meeting tomorrow." He stood, leaving a $10 bill on the table without checking the amount of their order, and walked out of the diner without looking back. Sarah sat motionless for a long moment, staring at the money he had left. Then, with careful precision, she counted out the exact cost of his coffee and pastry, leaving the rest untouched. James watched this small act of integrity and felt something shift inside his chest. He had seen corporate executives manipulate million-dollar contracts with less grace than Sarah had just shown in refusing charity. Without fully planning his next move, he stood and walked to her table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentler than the tone he used in boardrooms. "I couldn't help but notice, aren't you Emma Wellington's tutor?" Sarah looked up, confusion flickering across her features. She had never heard that name before, but something in the stranger's expression suggested this was more lifeline than lie. I'm sorry, I don't think. James Wellington, he said, extending his hand. "My daughter Emma has been raving about her new tutor. Dark hair, kind eyes, works with the Morrison family on the Upper East Side." Understanding dawned slowly. Sarah glanced toward the door where Marcus had disappeared, then back at this well-dressed stranger who was offering her an escape from her humiliation. "Oh," she said softly. Yes. I think there might have been some confusion about schedules. Mind if I sit for a moment? I'd love to hear how Emma's doing with her reading." As James settled into the chair Marcus had vacated, Sarah found herself studying his face. There was something honest about the lines around his eyes, a weariness that suggested he understood more about struggle than his expensive suit might indicate. "Your daughter," she said carefully. "What grade is she in?" "Second grade. 7 years old, incredibly stubborn, and currently convinced she's going to be a paleontologist who discovers dinosaurs in Central Park." Despite everything, Sarah smiled. "That sounds like most 7-year-olds I know. She's been having trouble with reading confidence. Gets frustrated when the words don't come easily." James signaled the waitress. "Would you like something to eat?" "I haven't had lunch yet, and I hate eating alone." Sarah hesitated. The $5 in her purse would cover her coffee, but nothing more, and she had learned to be wary of kindness that came with strings attached. "I should probably head home soon," she said. "Please," James said. And there was something in his voice that wasn't quite pleading but wasn't quite casual either. "I really would like to talk about tutoring options. And frankly, after watching your date just now, I think you could probably use a conversation with someone who isn't a complete waste of space." Sarah's eyebrows raised. "You were watching? Hard not to." Guy was practically broadcasting his personality across the entire restaurant. James's expression grew more serious. For what it's worth, his definition of independence seems pretty narrow. The waitress approached, and James ordered a club sandwich and fries. "And for the lady?" Sarah looked between the menu and James's expectant face. Something about his presence felt safe, like sitting with an older brother rather than a potential threat. "Grilled cheese," she said finally. "And maybe some of those fries." As they waited for their food, the conversation shifted from the fictional Emma to real topics. Sarah found herself talking about her actual tutoring work, her morning shifts at the bakery where she had learned to pipe frosting flowers that looked almost too beautiful to eat, and her weekend job at the bookstore where she had read more novels than she had ever purchased. James listened with the focused attention of someone accustomed to extracting important information from complex presentations. But more than that, he listened like someone who understood that every detail mattered, that the space between Sarah's words contained as much truth as the words themselves. "What about you?" Sarah asked as their food arrived. "What do you do when you're not rescuing strangers from bad dates?" James laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise him. "I run a technology consulting firm. We help companies streamline their digital infrastructure." He paused. "It's about as exciting as it sounds. But you're good at it." "I'm good at it," he agreed. "Though I'm not sure that's the same thing as enjoying it anymore." Sarah took a bite of her grilled cheese and studied James's face. "How long since you've done something just because you wanted to?" The question caught him off guard. That's a very good question. I ask myself that sometimes. Like, when did survival become so consuming that I forgot about living? James found himself thinking about Emma, about the way she threw herself into finger-painting projects that covered every surface of their kitchen, about her absolute certainty that dinosaur bones were waiting somewhere in Manhattan soil. When had he stopped believing in the possibility of unexpected discoveries? "I have a daughter," he said. 7 years old. She still believes in magic. What kind of magic? The kind where you can find dinosaur fossils in playground sand. Where reading the right story before bed can prevent nightmares. Where making pancakes shaped like elephants can fix any problem. Sarah smiled. "She sounds wonderful. She's also the reason I work as hard as I do, and sometimes I worry that working so hard is keeping me from being the father she deserves." The honesty of this admission surprised them both. James rarely shared personal details with business associates, let alone strangers in diners. But something about Sarah's presence invited truth. "Can I tell you something?" Sarah said. "The family I tutor for, the Morrisons, they have everything. Beautiful house, expensive cars, nannies, private schools. But their 8-year-old son told me last week that he wishes his parents would just sit with him while he does homework instead of checking their phones. James absorbed this information quietly. Point taken. I'm not judging. Sarah continued quickly. I understand that providing for someone you love requires sacrifice. I just think sometimes we forget that presence is its own kind of provision. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a small whirlwind in a purple dinosaur t-shirt. Emma Wellington burst through the diner door, followed by a harried-looking woman in her 50s. Daddy! Emma called, spotting James immediately. Mrs. Chen said you were having lunch, and I finished my art project early, and she said maybe, if we asked very nicely, we could come find you, and I really wanted to show you what I made. James's entire demeanor shifted, his formal composure melting into something warm and unguarded. You know you're not supposed to interrupt when Daddy's in meetings. But this is important, Emma insisted, climbing into the booth beside him. I made a dinosaur habitat, and it has real plants and everything. Sarah watched this interaction with growing amazement. The serious businessman who had rescued her from humiliation was now helping his daughter arrange a shoebox diorama on the diner table, asking detailed questions about Tyrannosaurus feeding habits with the gravity of a United Nations negotiation. Emma, James said eventually, I'd like you to meet Miss Sarah. Sarah, this is my daughter Emma, and our nanny Mrs. Chen. Emma looked at Sarah with the frank curiosity of childhood. Are you having lunch with my daddy? Do you like dinosaurs? Do you want to see my habitat? I would love to see your habitat, Sarah said seriously. And yes, I do like dinosaurs, though I have to admit I don't know as much about them as you probably do. For the next 20 minutes, Emma provided a comprehensive tour of her shoebox Jurassic period, complete with hand-painted trees and dinosaurs crafted from modeling clay. Sarah listened with the same focused attention she brought to her tutoring work, asking questions that made Emma's face light up with pride. James found himself watching Sarah interact with his daughter, and feeling something he had not experienced in years, the sense that his two worlds, professional and personal, might actually coexist peacefully. Emma responded to Sarah's genuine interest, with the trust she typically reserved for her closest friends, and Sarah seemed to understand instinctively how to engage with a 7-year-old without condescension. When Mrs. Chen finally insisted they needed to head home for Emma's piano practice, Emma hugged Sarah goodbye, as naturally as if they had known each other for months. Will you come have dinner with us sometime? Emma asked. Daddy makes really good spaghetti, and I can show you my fossil collection. Sarah glanced at James, unsure how to respond to such a direct invitation. That's very kind, Emma. I'll have to see about my schedule. Daddy will give you our phone number, Emma announced with the confidence of someone accustomed to arranging playdates. Right, Daddy? After Emma and Mrs. Chen left, the diner felt suddenly quiet. Sarah and James sat across from each other, both aware that something significant had shifted during Emma's visit but uncertain how to name it. She's remarkable, Sarah said finally. She's the best thing I've ever done, James replied. Also the most terrifying. Terrifying how? Knowing that someone depends on you so completely. Knowing that every decision you make affects not just your own life, but someone else's future. Knowing that she's watching and learning from everything you do, even when you think she's not paying attention. Sarah nodded slowly. I think about that sometimes with the children I tutor. How much they absorb without us realizing it. Is that what you want to do long-term? Teaching. The question hit close to something Sarah rarely allowed herself to examine. I don't know. I love working with kids, but I never finished college. Sometimes it feels like wanting something you can't afford is just another kind of torture. What would you study? Elementary education, probably. Or child psychology. Something that would let me help kids who are struggling, not just academically but, I don't know. Kids who need someone to believe in them. James considered this. What stopped you from finishing college? Sarah's expression grew guarded. Life stopped me. My mom got sick when I was a sophomore. Cancer. I dropped out to take care of her and help with medical bills. She died 2 years ago, and by then I was so far behind financially that going back seemed impossible. The simple recitation of these facts carried no self-pity, but James heard the weight they represented. I'm sorry about your mother. Thank you. She was incredible. Worked 2 jobs her whole life to make sure I had opportunities she never had. I think about her every day. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each processing the significance of shared confidences. Finally, James spoke. Would you be interested in actually tutoring Emma? Sarah looked up sharply. Are you serious? Completely serious. She's struggling with reading confidence, and after watching you with her today, I think you might be exactly what she needs. The position would pay well enough to help with your financial situation, and it might give you some flexibility to consider other options. I don't want charity, Sarah said quietly. This isn't charity. This is me offering a job to someone who clearly understands children, and who my daughter already adores. The fact that it might help both of us is just good business. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of pity or condescension. She found neither. What would the schedule look like? 3 afternoons a week, maybe some weekend sessions if needed. We can work around your other jobs initially, and if things go well, maybe we can discuss expanding the arrangement. The offer hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they were ready to cross. For Sarah, it represented not just financial stability but the possibility of moving toward work that mattered to her. For James, it meant bringing someone into the carefully protected sphere of his life with Emma. Can I think about it? Sarah asked. Of course. But I hope you'll say yes. As they prepared to leave the diner, James insisted on paying for lunch, despite Sarah's protests. Professional courtesy, he said firmly. I'm interviewing a potential employee. Outside on the sidewalk, Manhattan afternoon light filtered through the urban canyon of buildings, casting long shadows across their faces. Sarah realized that what had begun as one of the most humiliating experiences of her year had somehow transformed into something else entirely, possibility, maybe, or at least the memory of what hope felt like. Thank you, she said. For lunch, for the job offer, for helping me today. Thank you for letting me, James replied. And for showing Emma that adults can be genuinely interested in 7-year-old paleontology theories. Sarah laughed. That wasn't difficult. She's going to make an amazing scientist someday. I think so too. They exchanged phone numbers, and Sarah promised to call within the week, with her decision about tutoring Emma. As she walked toward the subway station, James found himself hoping she would say yes for reasons that extended well beyond his daughter's reading comprehension. 2 days later, Sarah called to accept the position. Her first tutoring session with Emma was scheduled for the following Tuesday, at James's apartment on the Upper West Side. When she arrived, nervous and carrying a bag of carefully selected children's books, Emma greeted her at the door with a detailed report about a National Geographic documentary she had watched the night before. Did you know that some dinosaurs had feathers? Emma asked breathlessly, leading Sarah into the living room. And that birds are actually dinosaurs that never stopped evolving? I did not know that, Sarah said solemnly. That's incredible. James watched from the kitchen doorway as his daughter launched into an impromptu lecture about evolutionary biology, using hand gestures and sound effects to illustrate her points. Sarah listened with the same focused attention she had shown at the diner, asking follow-up questions that kept Emma talking and thinking. When they finally settled down with books, Sarah discovered that Emma's reading struggles stemmed not from lack of ability but from perfectionism. Emma wanted to understand every word completely before moving forward, becoming frustrated when she encountered unfamiliar vocabulary. You know what I do when I find a word I don't know? Sarah asked. Look it up? Sometimes. But sometimes, I try to be a detective about it. I look at the other words around it and see if I can figure out what it might mean. Like if I'm reading a story about a little girl walking through a forest, and she sees something enormous behind a tree, what do you think enormous might mean? Emma considered this. Maybe? Big? Exactly. You use the clues in the story to solve the mystery of the word. That's really smart detective work. Over the following weeks, Sarah developed strategies to help Emma approach reading as adventure rather than assignment. They created character voices for different stories, drew pictures of scenes they had read, and played word detective games that turned vocabulary challenges into puzzles to solve. James found himself looking forward to Tuesday and Thursday afternoons in a way that surprised him. Sarah's presence in their apartment brought something he had not realized they were missing. The sound of Emma's uninhibited laughter. The sight of his daughter's confidence growing day by day. And the subtle warmth of adult conversation that did not revolve around quarterly projections or custody schedules. One Thursday in November, James arrived home early to find Sarah and Emma at the kitchen table, working on a story Emma had written about a dinosaur who wanted to be a ballet dancer. And then Rexy did a pirouette so beautiful that all the other dinosaurs applauded. Emma read aloud, her voice gaining confidence with each sentence. That's wonderful, Em, Sarah said. What do you think happens next? I think Rexy starts a dance school for dinosaurs who don't fit in with the regular dinosaur activities. James stood in the doorway, watching his daughter's animated storytelling and Sarah's encouraging responses, and felt something shift inside his chest. This was what he had been trying to provide for Emma, not just educational support, but someone who genuinely delighted in her unique perspective on the world. When the tutoring session ended and Emma went to her room to work on homework, James lingered in the kitchen with Sarah. Her confidence has improved remarkably, he said. She was always confident, Sarah replied. She just needed permission to be imperfect while she learned. Is that something you learned in your education classes? Sarah smiled. That's something I learned from my mother. She used to say that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing things anyway. Emma's got plenty of courage, she just needed to learn to trust it. James poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if Sarah wanted one. It had become their routine, these brief conversations after Emma's sessions, and he found himself looking forward to them as much as watching his daughter's progress. Can I ask you something personal? Sarah said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Of course. Why did you really help me that day at the diner? The real reason, not the story about mistaking me for Emma's tutor. James considered the question carefully. I saw someone who refused to be diminished by her circumstances. And I guess I recognized something of myself in that. Yourself? I wasn't always successful, Sarah. I built my company from nothing, working 70-hour weeks, living on instant noodles and determination. I remember what it feels like to calculate whether you can afford lunch, to make decisions based on dollars rather than preferences. Sarah studied his face. But you made it out. I got lucky. Right idea at the right time with the right investors. But luck only matters if you're prepared for it, and staying prepared when you're exhausted and broke requires a kind of strength that not everyone understands. And you thought I had that strength? I thought you had that strength and deserved better than being lectured about independence by someone who had probably never worked 3 jobs in his life. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, and watching the November afternoon fade into evening beyond the kitchen windows. Finally, Sarah spoke. I've been thinking about what you said. About going back to school. James's attention sharpened. And? I've been looking into programs. Part-time options, evening classes. It would take longer, but I think I could make it work, especially with the tutoring income. What would you study? Elementary education with a focus on learning differences. I want to work with kids who struggle, who need someone to believe they're capable of more than their current circumstances suggest. James felt a surge of admiration for Sarah's determination to transform her own struggles into a way of helping others. That sounds perfect for you. It's still just an idea. Financial aid applications, entrance exams, figuring out schedules. It's overwhelming when I think about everything at once. Most worthwhile things are overwhelming when you think about everything at once. That's why you break them down into smaller pieces. Sarah looked at him with curiosity. Is that business advice or life advice? Both. Same principles apply. Over the following months, Sarah did exactly that. She took entrance exams in January, submitted applications in February, and received acceptance letters in April. By September, she was enrolled in a part-time evening program at Columbia Teachers College, balancing classes with her continued work tutoring Emma and 2 other children. James found himself invested in Sarah's progress in ways that extended beyond their professional relationship. When she worried about a particularly difficult education theory class, he helped her break down complex concepts into manageable components. When she struggled with statistics requirements, he found her a tutor who specialized in mathematics for education majors. Emma, meanwhile, had flourished under Sarah's guidance. Her reading level had improved dramatically, but more importantly, she had developed a love of stories that made homework feel like play. She wrote elaborate tales about dinosaur adventures, illustrated them with careful detail, and read them aloud to anyone willing to listen. One evening in late October, as Sarah was packing up her tutoring materials, Emma made an announcement that caught both adults off guard. I think Sarah should come to the father-daughter dance at school, she said matter-of-factly. James nearly dropped the coffee mug he was washing. The father-daughter dance is for, well, fathers and daughters. But Sarah's important to our family too, Emma insisted. She helps me with reading, and she knows about dinosaurs, and she makes you smile more than you used to. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Emma, that's very sweet, but I think the dance is meant to be special time for you and your dad. Can it be special time for all of us? The simple logic of childhood cut through the careful boundaries James and Sarah had maintained around their relationship. They had both been aware of the growing connection between them, but had avoided naming it, perhaps afraid that acknowledging it might complicate the stability they had built around Emma's needs. What do you think, Daddy? Emma pressed. Sarah could wear a pretty dress and you could wear your fancy suit and we could all dance together. James looked at Sarah, trying to read her expression. What do you think? Sarah hesitated. Over the past year, she had become deeply attached to both Emma and James, but she had been careful not to assume her role in their lives extended beyond professional boundaries. The thought of attending a family event felt simultaneously wonderful and terrifying. I think, she said slowly, that depends on whether you're comfortable with people assuming we're more than we are. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither had been willing to examine directly. What if we are more than we are? James asked quietly. Emma looked between the two adults with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully orchestrated a revelation. Does that mean Sarah's going to be my stepmom? James said quickly, that's not. We haven't. Because I would like that, Emma continued cheerfully. Sarah already knows all my favorite books and she doesn't get scared during the dinosaur documentaries with the really loud roars. Sarah found herself laughing despite the intensity of the moment. Those are definitely important qualifications for a stepmom. Plus, she makes you happy, Emma added, looking at her father with the perceptive directness of a child who had learned to read adult emotions carefully. You smile different when Sarah's here. James realized that his 7-year-old daughter had observed something he had been trying not to acknowledge even to himself. Sarah did make him happy, in a way that felt both surprising and inevitable. Her presence had brought lightness into their carefully structured life, not by disrupting their routine but by infusing it with warmth and possibility. Emma, he said gently, why don't you go get ready for your bath while Sarah and I talk about the dance? After Emma skipped out of the kitchen, James and Sarah faced each other across the counter that had become the site of so many comfortable conversations. She's not wrong, James said finally. About you making me happy. About you being important to our family. Sarah's heart was beating fast enough that she wondered if James could hear it. James, I know this complicates things. I know we agreed to keep this professional. But somewhere along the way, watching you with Emma, talking with you about everything and nothing, I realized that what I feel for you goes well beyond gratitude for excellent tutoring services. Sarah had been preparing for this conversation without knowing it, rehearsing responses during subway rides and morning shifts at the bakery. But now, faced with James's honest admission, she found herself speechless. I care about you too, she said eventually. More than I should, probably. More than I planned to. Why more than you should? Because you're successful and established, and I'm still figuring out basic things like whether I can afford graduate school. Because your life is organized, and mine is held together with determination and coffee. Because Emma deserves stability, not someone who's still learning how to provide it for herself. James moved around the counter until he was standing directly in front of Sarah. Can I tell you what I see when I look at you? Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. I see someone who works 3 jobs and still finds energy to make learning fun for a 7-year-old. I see someone who turned personal struggle into empathy for others. I see someone who makes my daughter laugh and challenges me to be present instead of just productive. He paused. I see someone who makes both Emma and me better versions of ourselves. What about the practical things? The differences in our situations? What about them? Money doesn't make someone a good partner or a good parent. Caring does. Showing up does. And you've been showing up for Emma and for me in ways that matter more than any bank balance. Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes. I've never had someone see me the way you do. Like I'm capable of more than just surviving. You are capable of more than surviving. You're capable of thriving, of building something beautiful, of being exactly who Emma and I need. When James kissed her, it felt like the logical conclusion to months of shared conversations and comfortable silences, like the answer to a question they had both been afraid to ask. Sarah kissed him back with the intensity of someone who had learned not to take unexpected happiness for granted. They were interrupted by Emma's voice calling from the bathroom. Daddy! I need help with the water temperature. James and Sarah broke apart, both laughing at the perfectly timed interruption. We should probably talk about this more, Sarah said. We should, James agreed. But first, we should probably discuss dance dress options with our daughter. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the straps of a navy blue dress she had found at a consignment shop in Brooklyn. It was simple but elegant, the kind of dress that made her feel confident without trying to be someone she wasn't. The father-daughter dance was being held in the school gymnasium, decorated with twinkling lights and handmade banners created by the students. When James and Emma picked up Sarah from her apartment, Emma was wearing a bright purple dress with dinosaur-printed accessories that she had insisted were formal dinosaurs. You look beautiful, James said to Sarah, and she could tell he meant it. You clean up pretty well yourself, she replied, adjusting his tie playfully. At the dance, they navigated curious glances and polite questions from other parents with the grace of people who had learned to trust their own choices regardless of external judgment. Emma introduced Sarah to her classmates as my reading teacher who's also my daddy's girlfriend, with the matter-of-fact pride of a child whose family had simply expanded to include more love. James danced with Emma to upbeat pop songs, spinning her around until she dissolved into giggles. Then he danced with Sarah to slower music while Emma showed off her own dance moves to anyone willing to watch. And finally, all three of them danced together to Sweet Caroline, with Emma in the middle and James and Sarah on either side, creating a circle of connection that felt both brand new and completely natural. As the evening wound down, Emma fell asleep in the car on the way back to Sarah's apartment. James carried her upstairs, while Sarah unlocked her door, and they tucked Emma into Sarah's bed for the night, rather than wake her with another car ride. "She's going to want pancakes in the morning," James warned quietly. "I make excellent pancakes," Sarah replied. "Elephant-shaped ones, if requested." They sat on Sarah's small couch, finally alone after months of carefully chaperoned conversations. The apartment was tiny, but warm, filled with plants Sarah had rescued from the sidewalk and books she had accumulated through her various jobs. "Is this what you want?" James asked. "This life we're building together?" Sarah considered the question seriously. A year ago, she could never have imagined sitting in her own apartment with someone who loved her, planning breakfast for a child who felt like family. The life she was building with James and Emma was different from any future she had previously envisioned, but it felt more real and more sustainable than any dream she had dared to pursue. "I want this," she said firmly. "I want you, and Emma, and the chaos of trying to balance graduate school with tutoring with whatever comes next. I want to help Emma grow up knowing she's loved and capable of anything. I want to figure out how to blend our different backgrounds into something that works for all of us. Even when it's complicated? Especially when it's complicated. The best things usually are." James pulled Sarah closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his side. "Emma was right, you know. About you making me smile different." "Different how?" "Like I believe good things can happen without having to fight for them. Like happiness can be simple instead of earned." Sarah looked around her small apartment, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From sitting in a diner with $5 and a heart full of worry to falling asleep next to someone who saw her potential rather than her limitations, it felt like a transformation so complete it should have taken years rather than months. But perhaps that was the nature of real change. It happened not in dramatic gestures but in daily choices to trust, to hope, to show up authentically even when the outcome remained uncertain. Sarah had learned to calculate carefully, to make $5 stretch into dignity and determination. Now she was learning to budget for joy, to make space in her life for love that didn't come with conditions or price tags. In the bedroom, Emma stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about dinosaurs and dance shoes. James and Sarah smiled at each other, already fluent in the language of shared parenting responsibilities. "Should we wake her up to brush her teeth?" Sarah whispered. "Let her sleep. We'll deal with dental hygiene in the morning, along with elephant pancakes, and probably a detailed review of everyone we met at the dance. And planning next week's tutoring sessions. And figuring out how to explain to Mrs. Chen that Emma now has 2 homes." They sat quietly, cataloging the beautiful complexity of the life they were choosing together. Outside Sarah's window, Manhattan hummed with its endless energy, full of people making their own calculations about love and survival, dignity, and hope. Sarah thought about her mother, who had worked tirelessly to provide opportunities she never got to see fulfilled. She thought about the young woman who had sat in a diner with $5, afraid of being diminished by circumstances beyond her control. That woman could never have imagined this moment, not just the financial stability or the beautiful relationship, but the quiet confidence that came from being truly seen and valued. James thought about the man he had been before Emma, driven by ambition and the fear of returning to poverty. He thought about the father he had tried to become after his divorce, protective and careful and sometimes lonely. That man could never have imagined opening his life to someone whose path to success looked so different from his own, or discovering that love could feel like expansion rather than risk. In the morning, Emma would wake up demanding pancakes and asking detailed questions about wedding planning that would make both adults laugh and panic in equal measure. Sarah would realize she had accidentally created a family without meaning to. And James would understand that the best business decisions he had ever made had nothing to do with quarterly profits. But for now, they sat together in Sarah's small living room, listening to Emma's peaceful breathing and planning a future that honored both security and dreams, both practical necessity and the kind of everyday magic that turns strangers into family. The city hummed around them, full of people carrying their own $5 stories, their own calculations about dignity and hope. Somewhere in Manhattan, other lives were shifting and changing, other connections were forming across the space between survival and possibility. Sarah and James had learned that love was not about rescue or salvation, but about recognition, seeing someone clearly and choosing to build something together anyway. And in that choice, in that quiet moment of absolute certainty, they found exactly what Emma had diagnosed from the beginning, a family that fit together not because it was perfect, but because it was real.